So in the last section, I left you with two questions that we pretty much answered, but let me give you an explanation of what that is in a pictorial version. I spoke to you about the difficulty levels and whether or not you should lean on how easy it is for the next person in your chain or the next partner that you work with, how easy it is for them to execute against the business that you have, whether it's a service-based business or a product, or whether or not you're raising money. They've got to be relevant to it. And of course, the money is a very big factor too, in terms of how much they're going to be paid for doing that for you. So here's this little graph here. It's really just to illustrate the difficulty levels and give you a really good visual as to how this works in a practical sense. If you imagine I'm a property developer, if you're a property developer yourself, and you've created a big building, and in this building you've got 50 different apartments that you now need to sell. If you sold them yourself, that would be a very high difficulty level, right? But you'd also benefit from a very high profit, okay? Because you haven't split that margin. If you're working with, let's say, a 20% margin, you haven't split it up with anyone else. So you're basically taking all of it, maybe less a few expenses of sorts. But the fact is that the amount of money that's available to you is significantly higher. As soon as you pull in someone else down that chain, and remember, we're talking about taking your margin and slicing it up, right? We're not just paying small fees out. We're taking an entire margin, and that's how we're enticing the next person down the chain to work with you. So let's say you bring on a real estate investment company or a real estate sales company, and they're looking to sell. Now, of course, because they're relevant to your industry, the jobs become easier, right? It's become easier. But equally, they're taking a lesser amount. They're taking, maybe if out of the 20%, you're paying them, say, 15%, because you know they're going to have to use staff, right? So, but the jobs become easier because they have relevant industry partners. They have relevant people to work with. Their staff are trained on selling real estate. So, you know, it's an easier job for them to sell this building that you have. Same goes for any kind of manufacturing or merchandising. If you're selling shoes and you go to shoe retailers, it's the same process. The fact is the next person has to be relevant and it's got to become easier for them to sell. And there's and I'm going to give you an example of where I went wrong with this. So one of the first products that I was selling after my recruitment days, and I started shifting into the real estate world. And there was a point where I started selling just other types of merchandise. And I had this really good contract for printer cartridges. Selling the actual printer cartridges that go in industrial or in big printers that would sit in office spaces. You know, the ones that go up to your chest. I'm talking the really big office style printers. And we would sell these cartridges, and I'd sell them en masse. But what I would do is I would work with these different introducers, and they would introduce me to companies that would sell stationery. And those were great companies because whilst they were selling paper and they were selling all sorts of different kind of stationery items, printer cartridges were naturally something they would sell as well. And of course, if I was giving them a really decent margin, like say 70% of what I was taking, they'd be more inclined to sell it for me. Then it all went wrong with this one company that I worked with. I was introduced to the business. So that would be the second person down the chain. I was introduced to this business, it had a very bustling, very energetic sales floor. I mean, they used to sell, I think they were selling some kind of online software package. I think it could have even been a customer relationship system of some sort. But they were really selling it, and basically they had a lot of industry office companies. You know, they had a lot of industry contacts within the office space environment where all their clients were would effectively have a printer in their office space. So it made sense to utilize their sales teams to actually sell these printer cartridges of mine. But the problem was the difficulty level shot through the roof. And the reason that happened was because that company didn't know anything about printer cartridges. They didn't know how to sell them. They didn't know what types of printers they were. They may have known a few brands, but they didn't really understand the differences between the printers and what they were capable of and what kind of cartridges that they would need. And of course, you know, if any of you have bought a printer out there, you know that the printer's not that expensive. Even if it is expensive, it's really the money's really made in the cartridges that are being sold. So this was a situation where I had, let's put a green line here actually. I had this flow where the next person, the introducer, new contacts, new industry, but then I hit this big wall because they had no idea how to sell it. And it was very bad for me. It was very bad for them. I mean, you've really got to think about this on the ground level of that company. It's not even just bad for me. It's bad for that company and its staff. And so let me give you an example, or let me take it to the real ground level. Let's say you've just started. I'm using my investment offer here. Let's say you've just started your execution plan. You've got your product. You're really happy. You're confident. You know, you've got yourself a relevant industry partner. If you're an investment offer, you find an alternative investment company. If you've got your shoes made, you find a relevant retail outlet or a series of them. The first thing you want to do is you want to, and this is the first client that you have. So we're not talking about anyone else. We're not talking about all these different distributors. We're talking about the very first distribution partner that you take on. That, if we kind of zoom into that distribution partner, this is what happens. You or your staff have approached them. They're bought into your idea. They like the margin. They like the structure. They think and they believe in your business or your product. So this is the agent, the broker, the first retail outlet, whatever it is. That's the first entity. They are now using their staff to tap into their pre-existing buyers. That is the process you want with every single company. As much as it's important for you to have it along your entire chain, as much as it's important for you to think about it in the way you're going to plan your entire strategy, you've got to be conscious of the fact that it's got to be like that for them internally too. And going back to that printer cartridge example, you see, yes, that company were a sales company and they had loads of the companies in their books. The clients that they had were the relevant companies that I would want to speak to, but they had no idea how to sell. And if you look at this example, if it's relevant and they already sell real estate, they're talking to their staff. It's just another product on their books that they can sell. And they'd be more inclined to sell it because, of course, you've structured right and you're giving them a decent chunk of money. So they really want to sell it for you. And they're tapping into pre-existing buyers. They're already established pool of potential clients. If at this stage, you've got something completely different, something that's completely outside of their sphere of influence or confidence, and this company now has to train their staff, retrain them into selling something that they don't quite understand or they don't know how to sell, you're not going to be able to tap into their clients. That happens with me with my parking investment company, the private equity one. I tap into some alternative investment firms that are really focused on like these loan notes, these promissory notes and things like that, where their clients were used to selling or buying even basically debt. They were buying these notes, which would essentially they're loaning money to a property developer to build out something. So I was trying to get those companies to sell my real estate, and I was of course selling an actual plot of land that has an income producing element to it. These staff at the companies didn't know how to repitch or restructure their sales pitch. The company wanted to sell it because I gave them a decent chunk of commission to work with. So they're really trying hard to get their staff to be able to sell, but they just weren't able to get their buyers to start buying or their existing client bases to start buying. So that's an example of where it can go wrong. You might think that a business is relevant to you, but you've really got to evaluate them properly, because if there's anything that can go wrong with them selling your product, it will just turn off really quickly. The entire company will lose interest in your product, and then you'll be dead in the water. You've got this big product, you've got this big plan, you've put some money behind it, and now you've got no one selling it. So that's the difference when you're using distribution partners. You don't employ any of these entities. You're working on based on this harmonious relationship that you're building. You're relying entirely on them motivated to sell your product. And the more motivated they are, the more they're getting paid, the more likely they're going to sell it for you. And a really great example of this would be in the form of people and companies who do this exceedingly well. And in that instance would be, or an example of that, I should say, would be think about pharmaceuticals or insurance companies. I'm going to use pharmaceuticals as an example here. This is to finish off this section. Pharmaceuticals are masters at this. So are banks and Wall Street, but I've used the Wall Street example already. Let's look at pharmaceuticals. If you are a pharmaceutical, let's call you Big Pharma, because it could be anyone, right? Think of a big pharmaceutical company in your mind's eye, Johnson & Johnson or something. Whatever the case may be, as a really, really big company. And what they've done is they've created a new pill. Let's say this new pill is a new painkiller, like it's a competitor to ibuprofen of some sort, or some kind of prescription-based pill. Whatever the case may be, it is there to help you with your back pain, okay? So this big pharmaceutical company has made this new pill with different types of ingredients that haven't been used before. And what do they want to do? Well, they want to sell it, right? They're manufacturing this pill. They're manufacturing, and they want to get it merchandised, and they want to get it sold as fast as possible. So, who are their buyers? Well, their buyers are patients in need. That's their target market, right? They need to sell that pill to people who need painkillers. And they want a lot of them, right? Because they're big pharmaceuticals and they're making millions of these pills every day, right? So they've put a lot of money into it. They've structured their deal. They've got the structure in play in terms of how much money they're going to make off it. They've figured out how they're going to scale it, and now they're looking to distribute. So how do those big pharmas distribute? Okay. And before I say that, interesting fact, and this is super important. The way it goes is this: pharmaceuticals spend more than double the amount of money that they do spend on direct marketing to consumers as what they spend on direct marketing to their distribution network. And what I mean by that is if they're spending $100 million per year on marketing directly to patients, so I'm talking about those TV advertisements, those commercials that you see where you've got, maybe an older person, showing themselves in pain, and they take this pill. So, is your back in pain? Take this pill. And then they show this guy really happy, and then the disclaimer at the end where it says, while there's some kind of like happy music and there's some kids playing in the background, and it's just, you may die if you take this pill, you may die, you may have diarrhea, or something may happen to you in your sleep. Like they have all these disclaimers, but that's an example of the direct marketing that big pharmaceuticals, direct towards their buyers. But if they're spending more than double on their distribution network and the advertising and the effort and focus that they're putting there, we're talking 200 million or more. That's a massive difference. Why? Because they know that that's what's really going to bring in the money. And let me explain. If you've got a situation like this, where where do you buy your medicines from, your painkillers? You go to pharmacies, right? You go to your local pharmacy, and the incentive is the big pharmaceutical wants the pharmacies to now stock their new pill. And the only reason the pharmacy would stock that new pill is if there's a market for it. Okay. So because, the pharmacy has to buy them from the pharmaceutical, the main company. So for that to happen, they've got to be able to, they need to know that people are going to come and buy them, right? So what happens next down the chain? Well, so pharmacies can sell directly to patients. If they have the capacity and it's not prescription related, they can sell directly to patients because they already have people coming into the pharmacy. They're relevant to the pharmaceutical, of course, because people are coming in every day. They're buying cold medicines, cough medicines, they're buying painkillers. They're coming in from prescriptions from their where? Doctors. They're coming in from clinics. Clinics are referring clients to go to the pharmacy. Clinics. You've got hospitals that are sending patients home with prescriptions in their pocket to go back to the pharmacy. And then you have insurance companies. And what do insurance companies do? Well, they cover certain medications, don't they, as part of their insurance plans. And of course, who are paying for those insurance plans? These buyers. So these buyers are now knowing that this new pill is on the menu. So insurance companies give coverage to certain doctors, clinics, hospitals, and various others. So you've got now patients who have insurance that covers, or, that gives them coverage across these medical practices that they can go to as part of their coverage, their insurance coverage. And as part of that insurance coverage, it will cover these medications. So the big pharmaceutical will want the insurance company to have coverage of their new pill. Equally, they will want to have doctors and clinics and hospitals educated and understanding what this new pill can do and why they should be prescribing that, say, instead of ibuprofen. Okay. So how do they do that? Well, that's where this big budget comes into play. This is where $200 million goes into it every year. I mean, I'm just throwing that number. I'll pull that number out of the sky, but I'm sure it's a lot of money. And they spend that money in getting representatives. Let's use red for this. They're getting representatives, people going out there to talk to doctors, to set up presentations, to set up events, to educate the professionals within these sections or these business segments to start understanding what this new pill can do and start selling it, or let's say prescribing it to these patients in need. So these patients know it. So and all of this is designed to convince the pharmacy to buy as much of that stock as possible, or at least hold as much stock of that stock as possible so that people can buy it if they're drop shipping. The fact is, you've got a very, very well-oiled machine here, and they do it so well. They've got tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of money being pushed into convincing doctors, convincing clinics, convincing hospitals. They're doing everything under the sun to get insurance companies to take on their new pill. And of course, then distribute that amongst use their own people within the insurance company to have their doctors, clinics, and hospitals start understanding that they should be prescribing that. And of course, what's happening? All of this is tapping in to that pool of potential buyers. So the next section is going to be it's 5 steps I'm going to cover in that next section, which is going to break down how you can do this step by step. We're going to reverse engineer it. We're going to work on how you can take this perfect model that pharmaceuticals use and bring it into your little business, your little startup, and the company that you hope to drive up to become something great. So I look forward to seeing you in the next section.